The wind tore across the dusty main street of Dry Creek, carrying the harsh scent of sun-baked earth and the faint tang of smoke from a blacksmith's forge. The year was 1872, and the frontier was a land of hard men, harder hearts, and even harder judgments. Inside the modest cabin at the edge of town, Samuel Turner, 32, adjusted the blanket over his wife's trembling shoulders. Lila, 28, sat on a rickety chair cradling their newborn twins. Two fragile lives who had already known more hardship than many endured in a lifetime. A sudden knock rattled the door, and Samuel froze. The sound was sharp, almost aggressive. Outside, the town's mayor, a lean man with a permanent scowl, spat on the dirt. "Turner," he barked, "you and your family have overstayed your welcome. Best be packing." Lila clutched the babies tighter, eyes wide. Fear coursed through her veins like ice. "Samuel, please," she whispered. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of desperation. Samuel squared his shoulders. "We've paid our debts. We've worked this land fair and honest," he said, voice low but firm. "You can't just throw us out." The mayor laughed, a harsh, grinding sound that echoed in the cabin. "Rules are rules. And your situation does not sit well with some of the townfolk." He waved toward the dusty street where a few men lingered, watching, smirking, their eyes filled with judgment. The words landed like blows. "You mean because she's black?" Samuel said, jaw tightening. A man with a sun-creased face stepped forward. "That's right. You heard him. We don't want her kind here. Not with those babies." His voice carried the casual cruelty of a town used to acting without conscience. Lila's hand trembled as she pressed her palm to her mouth, holding back a sob. Samuel felt rage and helplessness collide in his chest. He glanced at the twins, tiny, delicate, innocent, and his heart threatened to shatter. "We leave," he said finally, his tone measured, but the steel under could not be ignored. "But know this isn't the end." The mayor spat again and turned away. "You've got till sundown, not a minute more." By mid-morning, Samuel and Lila had loaded their few belongings onto a creaking wagon. The babies fussed and cooed, oblivious of the cruelty outside, but Samuel felt each heartbeat like a drum of sorrow. He looked at Lila, her eyes dark pools of fear and courage intertwined, and swore silently he would find a way to protect them all. The road out of Dry Creek was a ribbon of dust, stretching into the jagged hills beyond. The sun beat down mercilessly, painting the landscape in harsh yellows and browns. The twins, barely a month old, slept against Lila's chest, swaddled in threadbare blankets. Samuel guided the wagon over ruts and rocks, muscles straining, hands blistered, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. The wilderness, though beautiful in its own stark way, offered no comfort. Crows circled overhead, calling out in shrill voices. A sudden rustle in the underbrush made Samuel tense. He gripped the reins tighter, his eyes narrowing. "It's all right," he whispered to Lila, though his own voice trembled with unease. "Just the wind." Hours passed, the wagon's wheels grinding over gravel, the twins stirring with tiny cries. Lila hummed softly, a fragile melody meant to soothe both her children and herself. Samuel watched her, the sun catching the strands of her hair, the worry etched into her youthful face. Every mile away from the town felt like both liberation and exile, a paradox he could not reconcile. By late afternoon, the sky turned a muted gray as clouds gathered. Rain threatened and the wind rose, tugging at their coats, rattling the wagon cover. They spotted a dilapidated shack tucked between two hills, a temporary refuge from both the elements and the hostile world they had left behind. Inside, the air was musty, the wooden walls leaning under the years. Lila set the twins on an old cot, wrapping them carefully in extra blankets. Samuel set about stacking firewood, striking flint until a stubborn spark caught. The small fire cast flickering shadows, dancing over Lila's worried face. Samuel knelt beside her. "We'll be safe here tonight. I promise." His voice was low, tender, yet resolute. He held her hand, feeling the chill of her fear transfer to him. Outside, the wind howled through the gaps in the walls, whispering threats that neither could fully ignore. As darkness fell, the sound of the wilderness, rustling leaves, distant wolf howls, and the occasional snap of a branch, reminded them that danger lurked in every shadow. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by the soft cries of the twins. Samuel's thoughts wandered to what had driven the town to such cruelty, and whether justice, or even mercy, could ever find them here. Morning arrived pale and cold, the mist curling over the hills like ghostly fingers. Samuel emerged from the shack, coat dusted with dew, and gazed across the valley. Lila remained inside, tending the twins, her movements careful, precise, protective. "You never told me much about your family," Samuel said, his voice quiet, breaking the dawn stillness. Lila looked up, eyes shadowed but glowing with unspoken truths. "There's nothing to tell," she said, though her hands lingered on the children's blankets. "Nothing anyone can understand. At least, not yet." Samuel sensed the weight behind her words. She had secrets, hidden layers, a past cloaked in both shame and power. The thought stirred a strange hope in him, a possibility that their suffering might not be endless. Yet, the present remained grim. The shack was fragile, the road back to town treacherous, and their pursuers still a lingering threat in the corners of the wilderness. Hours passed in careful routine, collecting water from a nearby stream, keeping the fire alive, watching for any sign of danger. Samuel felt the twins' warmth against his chest and thought of the townfolk who had scorned them. He imagined their tiny fists curling against injustice, their innocent eyes demanding a world better than this. As the sun climbed higher, a thought crossed Lila's mind, a plan, delicate yet daring. "Samuel," she whispered, her tone measured, almost reverent. "There's someone who can help us, if they ever know what's happened." Samuel's heart skipped. "Who?" he asked, a mixture of hope and fear. Her gaze turned distant, a secret smile brushing her lips. "My father," she murmured. You wouldn't believe what he can do." The words hung in the misty air, fragile and immense. Samuel stared at her, eyes wide, heart pounding. They had survived the cruelty of men, the harshness of the land, and now there was a possibility, a lifeline, a force unlike any they had encountered. Yet, at that moment, it remained only a whisper of hope, an unseen hand waiting to intervene. Outside the shack, the wind continued to sweep through the hills, carrying both the scent of rain and the promise of something far greater than fear. The world remained uncertain and the frontier unforgiving. But for the first time since their eviction, Samuel allowed himself to believe that the impossible might be within reach. The first light of dawn filtered through the gaps in the shack's walls, casting thin beams across the rough wooden floor. Samuel Turner, 32, rose quietly, muscles stiff from the previous night's vigil. The twins, barely a month old, slept against Lila Turner, 28, black, her long dark hair falling in loose strands over her shoulders. She hummed softly, a fragile melody meant to calm both herself and the children. The wind outside whispered across the hills, carried with it the faint scent of rain and distant smoke. Samuel knelt beside the small stream nearby, filling a battered tin cup with water. His eyes constantly flicked back toward the shack, scanning the misty slopes for any sign of pursuit. The previous day's eviction had left more than physical scars. It had awakened a vigilance he did not know he possessed. Every snapping twig, every distant animal cry, felt like a threat. Lila emerged with the twins swaddled tightly, her face pale but resolute. "They'll come looking for us," she said softly. Her voice betrayed both fear and a quiet determination. Samuel nodded, tightening his jaw. "Then we'll be ready." He helped her carry the children back into the shack, and together they fortified their meager refuge, stacking rocks against the weakest walls and closing gaps with scraps of cloth. The forest, beautiful yet unforgiving, seemed to watch them, waiting for the first misstep. Hours passed with a tense rhythm of quiet vigilance. Every rustle of leaves and crack of branch made Samuel's hand tighten on the rough with a shotgun propped against the wall. Lila kept her calm through gentle songs and whispered words, but Samuel knew the twins could sense the tension, and that every shiver, every whimper, added to the weight pressing down on them all. By mid-morning, the distant sound of hooves echoed through the hills. Samuel and Lila froze. He motioned for silence, his body tense, eyes scanning the tree-line. Emerging from the dust and brush came a group of men, 3 hardened outlaws, 30 Esto-40s, dust-covered, eyes glinting with malice. Samuel's pulse quickened. The wind carried the faint metallic scent of their guns, and the sharp click of spurs against boots announced their approach. Lila instinctively pulled the twins closer, whispering soothing words as Samuel readied the shotgun. "We have to hold them off," he murmured, eyes locked on the figures advancing steadily. The men stopped a few dozen feet away, grinning cruelly. One barked a challenge. "Turner, step out or we take what's ours." Samuel's mind raced. He could not allow them to touch his family. He shifted behind a boulder, the shotgun heavy in his hands, heart pounding in rhythm with every footstep on the gravel. The first shot cracked the air, the echo bouncing across the hills. Samuel fired into the dirt, sending clouds of dust toward the men. Panic flashed across Lila's face, but Samuel held his position, determined to protect them all. The standoff stretched tense and fragile. Samuel's resolve hardened with every second. "They won't break us," he whispered to Lila, though doubt tugged at the edges of his mind. The twins stirred, tiny hands clutching at her chest, unknowing witnesses to the peril around them. Every instinct screamed for them to flee, yet retreat offered no guarantee of survival. Hours of careful maneuvering followed, ducking behind rocks and fallen branches, keeping the twins shielded. Samuel's knowledge of the terrain became their only advantage. He led them through narrow gullies, over rocky outcrops, and across shallow streams, always one step ahead. Each movement was precise, deliberate, a combination of desperation and skill honed by life on the frontier. By late afternoon, the outlaws had grown frustrated, shouting threats that faded into the wind as Samuel guided his family deeper into the wilderness. They reached a narrow ridge overlooking a river below, its waters rushing with an urgency that matched his own heartbeat. He paused, surveying the scene. Lila's eyes met his, filled with fear but also an unspoken trust. "We'll cross here," he said, "quickly and stay close." They navigated the treacherous rocks, balancing over slippery moss and loose stones, the twins wrapped tightly against Lila's chest. Each step was a test of nerve and precision, yet Samuel moved with steady determination, ensuring that even the slightest misstep did not become disaster. As dusk approached, the landscape softened into muted grays and blues, and the first stars began to twinkle faintly overhead. Exhausted but alive, they reached a small clearing where the forest thinned and the terrain leveled slightly. Samuel allowed himself a moment to breathe, brushing sweat from his brow. Lila sank to her knees, cradling the twins, whispering soothing words to calm their fussing. "You have strength," Lila murmured, her voice barely above the wind. "Stronger than I knew." Samuel offered a rare smile, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Yet he knew the danger was not over. The outlaws could return, the wilderness itself was unpredictable, and they were still exposed. Lila's gaze drifted into the distance, shadowed by an unspoken thought. "Samuel," she said cautiously, "there's someone who can help us. Someone who knows," she hesitated, her hand resting protectively on the twins. "My father." Samuel's eyes widened. "Your father?" His voice was a mixture of surprise, hope, and disbelief. She nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "He's wealthy, powerful. If he knew what was happening, he could—" She trailed off, letting the possibility hang in the crisp evening air. The promise of help, the glimmer of hope, was a new kind of burden. It gave them direction, a light to move toward, yet also added uncertainty. How long until her father arrived? Would he arrive in time? And what price might their salvation demand? For the first time since their eviction, Samuel allowed himself a cautious optimism. They had survived eviction, hostile outlaws, and the harshness of the wilderness. Now, a secret ally, someone strong, someone capable, could tip the scales in their favor. The twins stirred, tiny hands clutching at their mother, as if sensing the change in the air. Samuel tightened his hold on the small bundle of hope and whispered to Lila, "We'll see this through together." Outside the clearing, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying both danger and the faintest hint of salvation. The frontier remained harsh, unforgiving, but somewhere beyond the hills, a force far greater than any outlaw was moving toward them, ready to change the course of their fate. The forest clearing was bathed in the muted gold of late afternoon, shadows stretching long across the rugged ground. Samuel Turner, 32, dust-coated and tense, held the twins close to Lila Turner, 28, black, elegant and determined, her hair catching the light in streaks of copper and shadow. Every heartbeat in that small family resonated with a fragile mix of hope and fear. In the distance, the sound of hooves clattered against the rocky soil. Samuel's grip on his shotgun tightened, but something in the rhythm, calculated, powerful, differed from the reckless approach of outlaws. Through the haze of dust, a figure emerged. Victor Langley, 55, the father Lila had spoken of, sat tall in the saddle. His tailored dark coat and polished boots marked him apart from the frontier dust, his gray hair and sharp eyes radiating authority. 3 bodyguards flanked him, disciplined and alert, the contrast of the wild landscape stark yet commanding. The outlaws, 30 Esto-40s, dusty, armed, and aggressive, froze. Their confidence faltered as the father's presence loomed closer. Victor's horse pawed the ground, a silent signal, and the men instinctively realized the power before them was not ordinary. Samuel felt a surge of hope he hadn't dared feel since the eviction, his jaw loosening, shoulders dropping slightly. Step back. Victor's voice rang clear, precise, echoing across the clearing. You have no authority here. The outlaws hesitated. Then, in a blur of motion, one reached for his rifle. Samuel's heart stuttered, but Victor's bodyguards moved with lightning precision, weapons raised, forcing the men into submission without a single shot fired. The tension was palpable, danger contained, yet unresolved, as Samuel processed the scale of what had arrived. Lila clutched her twins closer, whispering to them in soft tones that carried both reassurance and awe. Samuel's gaze met hers, and in that silent exchange, fear transformed into determination. They were no longer alone. The odds had shifted. Victor dismounted with smooth, deliberate movements, his gaze sweeping over the family. You're safe now, he said, and those who threaten you will answer for their actions. Samuel nodded, his chest tightening with relief and gratitude, yet his mind remained alert. He had learned the frontier was never truly safe, and that power could protect, but courage and vigilance must always accompany it. The outlaws, realizing their advantage had evaporated, attempted a hasty retreat. Victor's presence alone was enough to turn them from threat to prey. Samuel felt the tension in the air shift, the adrenaline in his chest slowly morphing into a steady pulse of relief. Still, the father's sharp gaze remained on the men, commanding, unwavering. This ends now, Victor said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You will leave and never return. And if you do, his eyes were steel. The threat was absolute, unyielding. The outlaws scattered, kicking up dust and cursing, their authority broken. Samuel and Lila exhaled collectively, a long-held breath finally released. The clearing fell silent. Only the soft wind rustled through the trees, and the distant rush of the river whispered like a lullaby. Samuel turned to Lila, his expression raw, weary, yet softened by the relief washing over him. We made it, he murmured, though the reality of the words still felt foreign, almost surreal. Lila smiled faintly, the twin shifting slightly in her arms. Thanks to him, she said, nodding toward Victor, whose imposing figure now approached with measured steps. Samuel's gaze followed, noting the aura of confidence and wealth that clung to the man, and the subtle kindness in his eyes as they landed on the small family. Victor knelt slightly, bringing himself closer to the twins. You've done well, he said softly, almost fatherly, a contrast of commanding tone he'd used with the outlaws. These little ones are safe, and so are you. Lila's eyes glistened with tears of relief, and Samuel felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the firelight flickering across the clearing. The family gathered together, a tableau of survival and resilience. The frontier around them remained wild, but within this circle, they found safety, strength, and a newfound sense of hope. Samuel's muscles relaxed, his heart slowing from the relentless pace of fear and vigilance that had dominated the past days. Lila whispered softly to the twins, brushing back strands of hair from their tiny faces. Victor spoke again, this time with a lighter tone. You'll have a home now, a place where no harm will come to you. Samuel's chest tightened with gratitude, understanding the magnitude of what this meant. It was more than wealth or power. It was protection, opportunity, and a chance to rebuild a life untainted by the cruelty they had endured. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows and bathing the clearing in a warm, golden light. Horses shifted, leaves rustled, and the first stars began to prick the sky. Samuel and Lila exchanged a look, an unspoken promise to cherish this reprieve, to honor the strength that had carried them here, and to face whatever came next together. As they began the slow walk back to Victor's estate, the twins nestled safely against Lila, Samuel's hand steadying her elbow. The air carried a sense of finality and resolution. The outlaws were gone, the threat dissolved, and a powerful ally had stepped in at precisely the right moment. The frontier had tested them, pushed them to the edge, but survival, courage, and unwavering love had triumphed. Samuel glanced at Lila, the twin shifting slightly in her arms, and finally allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. "We're home," he said, though the real home was not merely a place. It was a bond, the safety, and the shared strength that had carried them through every trial. Victor walked slightly behind, overseeing the small convoy, a watchful guardian whose presence was now a symbol of security and new beginnings. The family moved forward together, and for the first time in days, the wilderness around them felt less like a threat and more like a vast canvas for a new life waiting to be painted. The journey ahead remained uncertain, as the frontier always held potential for danger. But Samuel, Lila, and the twins now possessed a shield far greater than any rugged terrain or hostile townsman. They had each other, courage, and the unwavering support of a father who would not let harm touch them again. As night fell and stars glimmered above, the wind carried the faint sound of the river and the promise of peace, however fleeting. The frontier had not changed, but the family had. Survival had forged them stronger, adversity had bound them closer, and hope had illuminated a path forward brighter than any sunset could offer.